Welcome everybody to our session on human-centered design for LEA innovation. The time is 14:30. We can give it another minute before we start, but otherwise we shall move on fairly quickly, I think. What I'd like to say is welcome to our session, which is on human-centered design for LEA innovation. We're going to be discussing how law enforcement agencies, i.e. LEAs, can develop solutions that actually meet the needs of frontline officers and suit the context in which they work. My name is Davey, and I'm Professor of Design, Innovation and Society at the University of Salford. And together with Andrew Wootton, I coordinate the Cutting Crime Impact project. I'm joined today by Dr. Oscar Gestrein from the University of Groningen, and he's going to be moderating the session for us. And I'm also joined by two speakers from our LEAs. Just to explain in terms of the session program today, Andrew and I were going to be giving an introduction to the human-centered design approach adopted by CCI. After that, then we'll be hearing about community policing, revealing, reframing and redefining problems, and that's going to be given by Dr. Roberta Signori from Greater Manchester Police. We're then going to hear about predictive policing, uncovering and reframing the problem focus, and that's being given by Maximilian Querbach, and he is from the Landeskriminalamt in Nordrhein-Westfalen, and he's previously worked for the Landeskriminalamt in Niedersachsen. And so we're very grateful that he's coming back today to present on predictive policing. And just to explain that Dr. Oscar Gestrein from the University of Groningen, he's involved in the ethical, legal and social aspects of the Cutting Crime Impact. And so thank you very much, Oscar, that you're going to be our moderator today. Moving on, then just a few instructions, just to remind you that the session is being recorded. If you'd like to ask a question, please write in the chat window. It can then be read by the moderator during the question and discussion section. You'll see that we had opportunities for questions after the presentation on community policing and after the presentation on predictive policing, and the session will be finishing at 1600 hours. Okay, so moving on then to the first presentation. I'm pleased to introduce Andrew Wootton, who, to save his bandwidth, is keeping his camera off, but he is working all the slides and will be talking to you shortly. And we're going to be giving you an introduction to the human-centered approach that was adopted in the Cutting Crime Impact project. Andrew and we run the Design Against Crime Solutions Centre at the University of Salford, which we established in 2005. The Solutions Centre is a strategic partnership with Greater Manchester Police, the Landeskriminalamt in Lower Saxony, and the Research and Urban Consultancy in the Netherlands, DSP. Through such partnerships, we gain insight into the real-world issues facing practitioners, and we can work on collaborative research projects together. Our approach has evolved over 20 years' experience leading national and international research projects, in which we use design research to understand and innovate around complex issues, including urban crime and community policing. In essence, our research uses the design process as a structure or an organizing framework for delivering human-centered, transdisciplinary research. Cutting Crime Impact is our project about practice-based innovation in preventing, investigating and mitigating high-impact petty crime. Petty crime is the term used by the EU to differentiate everyday crimes such as assault, robbery and burglary and incivilities from organised crime, a more traditional priority in the EU level. while we've used this term in our strapline, we actually rarely use it outside of the EU context. As I'm sure you're all aware, that in English the term means small or insignificant, and it's certainly not then appropriate for use for crimes that impact so much on citizens' quality of life. CCI is a consortium of 12 partners, and at its heart we've got 6 law enforcement agencies from across Europe, including 2 LEAs that are presenting today. So that's Greater Manchester Police and also the Landeskriminalamt in Lower Saxony. The consortium is supported by 3 research organisations. So in addition to the University of Salford, we've got DSP Group, and we've also got the University of Groningen. We've also got 2 networking organisations, the Deutsche Präventionstag, and we've also got the European Forum for Urban Security, and we have a design consultancy called LOBA. CCI has a number of objectives, but the 2 that I'd like to focus on today relate to the development of toolkits. So one objective is to enable LEAs and security policymakers to adopt a preventative, evidence-based and sustainable approach to tackling high-impact petty crime. And it is to support 6 law enforcement agencies in researching and innovating practical evidence-based tools that meet end-user needs and operational contexts. CCI covers 4 focus areas: predictive policing, community policing, crime prevention through urban design and planning, measuring and mitigating citizens' feelings of insecurity. These focus areas were not actually specified by the EU or by the University of Salford, but that they were selected by our LEAs. And today we're going to be focusing primarily on predictive policing and community policing. Our presentation is divided into 2 parts. And in part 1, Andrew's going to be explaining the approach that we adopted in CCI, the design approach. So over to you, Andrew.
Thank you. So the design approach. So what do I mean by design approach? So we adopt a broad definition of design. We don't mean design in terms of styling or fashion or something looks. As Steve famously stated, design is not just what it looks like, design is how it works. And this includes design of products, services, environments, communications, systems, and processes. And there are a number of design approaches series, including user design, system design, design thinking, but most importantly, human-centered design. So the design approach adopted by the CCI project focuses on innovation and specifically the process of innovation, but it also focuses on end-user centeredness, being focused on needs and requirements of users and stakeholders. The project expended significant effort on problem framing and optimizing solution adoption. Innovation on CCI was in the context of the discipline of design, so industrial product, service, process and communication design. And more importantly, CCI adopted a human-centered design approach. So what is human-centered design? So human-centered design places the human at the center of the design process and focused on the human participants within the design system. So it's an approach that arose in the field of system design in response to problems arising from design solutions that were overly focused on technology and ran into problems. In this way, human-centered design contrasts with technology-centered design. One issues identified with technology-centered design I want to quickly highlight is what is called technology spiral. This starts with specific performance requirements and the emergence of a technology opportunity, and brought together by designers infusing technology into a design. Often technology we see as some panacea. The result leaves users overwhelmed by complexity and alternatives, retained overwhelmed by complexity, and managers overwhelmed by data. And the design react by introducing technology fixed in effect, infusing more technology into design. This results in even more complexity in use, increased maintenance complexity, increased management complexity, which of course results in a performance fall, especially in relation to the early inflated expectations. By this time has passed and another technical opportunity come along that claimed will fix these problems, requirements, and so the cycle begins again. This is why it's called a spiral. So the technology spiral was identified by William Rouse back in the 1980s, but it's probably even more than today. I know many people recognize their own experience with technology-centered projects this model. So human-centered design avoids the technology spiral by concentrating on the people through the design system, the nature of their roles and needs, how their role can be supported, and how their needs can be met. They tend to design objectives rather than technology objectives of the design process, and these objectives are to enhance human abilities, these be identified, understood, and cultivated. To overcome limitations, these should be identified, and where possible, compensatory mechanisms or processes devised. And to foster human existence, to understand and address preferences or concerns and values held by the humans in the system. So that approach, human-centered design, is necessarily bottom up rather than top down. It supports problem definition and problem framing, critical often for successful projects. As Russell and Ackoff pointed out, we fail often because we solve the wrong problem, because we get the wrong solution to the right problem. So human-centered design focuses on human capability, agency, responsibility, and offers an alternative perspective on the relationship between human users and design systems. So for example, we consider the airplane. The traditional view might suggest that the purpose of the pilot is to fly the designed aeroplane that takes people from A to B. But from a human-centered design perspective, the purpose of the designed aeroplane is to support the pilot who is responsible for taking people from A to B, or equally to support cabin crew who are responsible for their passengers' safety. So clearly, a system can be wholly technology-centered. Technology role is an enabler of human-centered objectives rather than as some sort of panacea. In technology-centered design, we find technology is at the center, it's the focus of the design. And consequently, for the user, there is quite a bit of effort in adapting to the way he's working and thinking that's the technology. Conversely, in human-centered design, the human's at the center, and it's the technology that has to be adapted to suit the human thinking and working. Consequently, learning requires human use, requires less effort. It's sort of down, if you like. A good example of the benefits of the approach is the research development work undertaken by Apple, designing the interface to the original iPhone. So I've got a short video. I hope it works. Tell me if you can't hear it, Caroline. So if you hear, back in 2007, Steve Jobs unveiled a new human-centered intuitive phone. So if you listen to the audio as he reveals the innovative interface that we now all pretty much take for granted.
We can see it, Andrew, but we can't actually hear unfortunately can't hear the oohs and the claps from the audience as he shows the new technology.
Basically, he's explaining the sort of rubber banding effect they have, the fact that you just use your finger to do the scroll. At the time, although we all take it for granted now, was incredibly novel interface for a, and it's something that spent for years researching the interface around the development and how people relate to it. Clearly, human-centered design, which requires deeper understanding of users and context, and doing this requires a particular mindset and attitude, one that is curious, empathetic, imaginative, collaborative, iterative, and humble. The PCI project built around the design process, and the design process starts with a problem or an opportunity and consists of 6 sequential phases alternating convergent and convergent thinking. And these phases are discover, define, develop, deliver, deploy, and digest. They take us from a problem or opportunity through research and edition of the design brief, development and delivery of final design outcome, deployment and use over time in the digest phase, where potentially a new problem or opportunity emerge and a new design process begin. CCI project activity were mapped to this process, were structured around this process, and they can be placed mainly in these first 4 phases. So in work packages 2 and 3, in the discover phase, partners undertook research to understand end user requirements, problem context. Research results from the discover phase were analysed, problem framed, and solution ideas generated in a collaborative design lab in the define phase. And this early research and analysis stage is referred to in human-centered design as the natural phase. Researchers behave like naturalists, like Diane Fossey studying gorillas. And this stage involves ideas and concepts from ethnography, even cultural anthropology when it's studying organisation. And it requires participant observation. The senior work packages 4 to 7 involve the development prototyping of the LEA tools, while in work package 8, partners finalising, printing, and demonstrating their tools. In this case, the designed outcome will be the CC tools. And over the next months until the project, partners will be to deploy, implement their tools. Caroline.
Thank you, Andrew. Just to say that it is breaking up a little bit, your presentation, unfortunately. And just to say, when the others present, they'll be sharing their own screen, so hopefully the quality will be a little bit better. So we're moving to part 2 now of our presentation. We wanted to just finish with some reflections on why we think the technology approach is so dominant within security and policing. Technology-centered solutions adopt a narrow concept of human roles, often ignoring some of the softer aspects of a role. In predictive policing, for example, officers are often treated like chess pieces to be deployed efficiently around a chessboard. This seems to stem from military thinking, but police officers actually have multiple roles and often involved in community engagement, and the approach ignores this. And because of that, it can be fundamentally demotivating.
The one important human factor is self-determination, and research suggests human well-being requires satisfaction of 3 psychological needs: autonomy, the need to be a causal agent in one's own life; competence, the need to feel in control of the outcome and experience mastery; and relatedness, the need to interact with and be connected to others. And meeting these 3 needs rise to intrinsic motivation, that's where someone engages in the task, feeling of ordinary, such a sense of fulfillment. Intrinsic motivation is extremely important to suggest. Given the autonomous nature of the role, the need in community policing for officers form meaningful relationships with communities and partners, and the need of police officers to lead on problem solving, be action oriented. Unfortunately, poorly designed technology-centered solutions can negatively impact this intrinsic motivation, for example, diminishing their role to that of a mere pawn and focusing on quantitative rather than qualitative outcomes. So there's a danger that poorly designed technology-centered solutions impact perceptions of autonomy and by impact on intrinsic motivation, which can have quite serious consequences for delivery policing priorities. So why are so many projects so technology-centered? Well, the motivations are actually quite human. Technology is often seen as positive politically. Decision-making to be seen as more forward thinking. For policymakers, it is seen as a vote winner. Technology is often conflated with innovation, so a focus on technology be thought to support promotion and career advancement. It may be a personal or organizational belief technology somehow a panacea or automatically providing a solution. And there may be a perception that it offers a speedy and simple solution to the problem. Or perhaps due to budget pressures or budget opportunities, a belief it's cheaper to simply put and implement technology off the shelf rather than looking to fully understand the problem in depth. But skipping the end of design research may appear to save time, may appear to be a shortcut, and indeed it's often quite difficult to have people to have time. One of the benefits of this project is that our LEA partners have had time and the resource to actually deep dive on these particular focus areas. So while doing that and skipping doing that and looking to an off-the-shelf solution might be considered a shortcut, it can have negative and consequences, and the shortcut may actually turn out to be a bit of a minefield. And we know of a couple of cases of this just from experience.
In terms of CTI, then our next steps are that the partner LEAs are currently completing development of their tools. We've got 8 tools that have been developed, 2 in each focus area. And these tools are going to be demonstrated in their working context and also will be revealed from last month onwards. Just to say that they're not cars, by the way, that we've produced. They are multiple tools that we've developed. We do hope that we'll be able to meet with you and perhaps to show you the tools. In December 2021 will be our final event, and we're very much hoping that that will be in person and that that will be in Brussels. So thank you very much. I do apologise for the quality of the sound, and apologies to you, Andrew, because I know it's very frustrating when the sound isn't as good as you'd like it to be. But we're going to be moving over to community policing now, and there will be an opportunity to ask some questions after the community presentation. Thank you very much. Roberta, do you want to share your slides? And I'll hand over to Oscar.
Yes, I will. Just 1 minute.
Thank you, Oscar.
Yeah, thank you for this presentation, Andrew and Caroline. And I hope that at least the wonderful visual aids allowed the participants to follow the presentation. And I must say, while Roberta is getting ready to present, that I always find it very fascinating that to see how much thinking actually went into this process. And for the following 2 presentations that we have, the first one now from Roberta on community policing and the second one on predictive policing, we will see that it's not only the human-centered element, which is also very important, but it also, if you take this kind of approach, it comes with a certain open-mindedness that then allows to revisit, so to speak, very well-known principles in the work of LEAs, such or seemingly well-known, such as community policing, but also how it can affect actually the discovery, so to speak, of the use of new technologies, as we will see later in predictive policing. But now, Roberta, if we still need a moment to get ready. Okay, I see. Yeah.
I just need Andrew to pass the presenter role to me.
No problem. I'll do that. So you should be presenter now.
Okay.
Yeah. So it takes just a second for us to get ready with the slides. No problem. Yes. So here we go. Yeah.
Excellent. Yes, just to say that you're quite right, actually, Oscar, in terms of keeping an open mind about the solutions, because the solutions were certainly not prescribed in the grant agreement. It was through a process of research that the LEAs developed the solutions. So thank you.
Yes, thank you, Oscar, for your introduction. And so, as mentioned previously, my name is Roberta. I am a CCI Research Fellow and I work for Greater Manchester Police, or GMP. And today I will be presenting the experience of my police force in researching community policing and developing an evidence-based tool in this area using the human-centered design approach. So to begin with, I'd like to give you an overview of community policing, and especially of the with special reference to the British context. So community policing is a policing approach that aims to enable the co-production of safety between citizens and the police, and it aims to foster the ability of citizens to influence policing at a local level. So its strategic objectives are to foster citizens' trust and increase their belief in police legitimacy. So according to this approach, police officers have to be accessible to citizens. They have to focus on proactive preventative work in striking opposition to more traditional reactive policing work. And they have to prioritize the concerns of local communities. Although the implementation of this policing approach varies greatly between countries, but also within countries, there are some key features that can be identified, including the focus on active engagement with citizens, on police engagement with citizens, on partnership working with local agencies, on the adoption of problem-solving techniques in order to enable a proactive preventative policing approach. And finally, community policing is usually decentralized, meaning that police officers are assigned to a specific location within certain geographic borders, and they are accountable for safety and security issues within that area. Now, in the UK, community policing is referred to as neighbour policing, and it is considered the bedrock of UK law enforcement. In England and Wales, since 2008, every beat area is basically a neighbourhood, as a dedicated neighbour policing team that comprises of community policing officers that in the UK are called NBOs and police community support officers, or PCSOs. Now, NBOs and PCSOs in a neighbour policing team should not be abstracted to other duties. They should not respond to incidents outside the local area or be called to do some other sort of policing work, but rather they should spend all their time engaging with local communities, working in partnership with agencies in the territory, and try to prevent and solve local safety issues within their local area. Now, in the first decade of the 21st century, the UK saw high levels of public investment in neighbour policing, and with the introduction of new measures and ad hoc community policing roles, such as the role of community policing support officer, or PCSOs. PCSOs are uniform members of police staff. So they're not police officers. They do not have the same powers as police officers, but rather the main duties are to engage with citizens, understand their concern around safety issues, and report and try to problem solve these issues. So following this decade of high levels of public investments, the UK in 2010 entered a period of austerity, meaning that funding for policing, and especially for neighbour policing, was dramatically reduced. For instance, the number of PCSOs dropped of 40% in a matter of 5-6 years. At the same time, the demand on neighbour policing teams increased because a lot of crimes that used to be underreported, for instance, domestic abuse crime, started to be reported more and more, and a lot of these crimes involve vulnerable people, therefore require more resource-intensive activities. So this combination of austerity and increased demand caused what is usually referred to as the perfect storm on neighbour policing. Now, this was a bit, I wanted to give you a bit of a context in terms of what community policing is and what are the issues within the British context. And now I'm going to talk you through the human-centered design process that we have adopted in order to research and develop our tool. So the first thing that GMP did was to undertake what is called requirements capture research into community policing. So basically, using qualitative techniques such as shadowing, interviews, and observation, we first of all identify the key users of community policing, not only police officers and police staff, but also citizens and GMP partners and business owners, private organizations. And then we tried to understand what were their experiences, their roles, and their needs within the context of community policing. Once this research phase, which lasted around 6 months, was concluded, we had a lot of key findings that we analyzed and reorganized into key themes. Now, these key themes were presented during a so-called design lab. A design lab is an opportunity for all the CCI partners, including members of police forces, researchers, and consultants, to come together, share the knowledge that they gather during the requirements capture research, and work collaboratively on reframing the problems identified and try to create new solutions and ideas for solving these problems. So now I'm going to talk you through some of the key themes that emerged during our requirements capture research into community policing. The first thing that I like to tell you is the fact that when it comes to community policing roles, and especially the roles of PCSOs, we have to say that these roles are very ill-defined. Yes, they have to, PCSOs have to engage with local communities, they have to problem solve safety issues in their local area, but how they actually do this highly depends on a PCSO's own understanding of community policing, their own interpretation of this policing approach, and it also depends on their personalities and their individual preferences. This means that PCSOs and MBOs often tend to create their own niche in the community, and the way that they deliver community policing can vary greatly from one area to the other. This means that there is basically a lack of consistency in how community policing is delivered, and this lack of consistency is even is exacerbated even more by the fact that currently in England and Wales there's no training focused on community engagement for PCSOs and MBOs. Another problem is the fact that PCSOs and MBOs often are misused, especially PCSOs are used to respond to crime and to support police officers' work in other areas, and it is quite difficult to supervise these obstructions and prevent them. So in terms of what PCSOs and MBOs need in order to deliver effective community policing, we noticed that they really need to demonstrate and to gain in-depth understanding not only of the local area but also of the people living in the area and the groups in the area and the dynamic between these groups. For instance, they have to be aware of any community tensions between different communities. They have to be aware that they have to understand cultural differences that might affect the interpretation of safety issues, and also cultural attitudes that may affect the way some people relate and engage with the police. And in order to gain that in-depth understanding, they have to create connections in their community. They have to be able to identify community leaders who might facilitate their access to certain groups. They have to identify community facility that facilitate engagement, and have to be constantly available to citizens in order to listen to their concern, provide feedback. And if they do not engage in this way, the problem is that some groups might demonstrate might show very low levels of trust in the police. They might feel very insecure around police officers. Another aspect of PCSOs and MBOs work is that they deal with very complex long-term challenges that usually involve vulnerable people who can be at the same time victims and offenders of crime, and therefore require long-term person-centered problem-solving work in collaboration with local agencies. So effectively, PCSOs and MBOs have the very delicate task of balancing short-term police interventions in the local area, for instance, responding to a crime, removing a threat, with this long-term person-centered work around vulnerable people. The problem is that there are clear constraints on police involvement. PCSOs and MBOs are police roles, they're not social workers, and they very often experience a sense of helplessness because they are unable to deliver that support that is needed in order to solve long-term safety issues. In this respect, partnership work is absolutely fundamental. The problem is that sometimes the priorities identified by NBOs and PCSOs are not exactly in line with the priorities of local agencies, and that can be an obstacle to finding long-term solutions to problems. In the end, though, citizens hold the police accountable for any security issues in their local area. And if an issue is not solved, then it's the PCSOs or MBOs that has to respond to that. So, as you might have guessed from what I've told you so far, PCSOs and MBOs really need to have an in-depth understanding of their local area. They need to be connection. They need to establish long-term relationship with key partners and key people in the communities. So every PCSOs and MBOs has their own unique baggage of contacts, relationship, knowledge. And the problem is when PCSOs and MBOs move to another post and leave their beat, this unique resource of knowledge and relationship lives with them. And during our requirements capture research, we found evidence that the movement of PCSOs and MBOs out of their beat can be a major source of frustration for communities and police partners, and it does have a negative impact on citizens' trust and their perception of the police. So in fact, the issue of continuity emerged as one of the most pressing problems identified by stakeholders and police officers, which affects the delivery of community policing and of effective community policing. As I mentioned before, PCSOs and MBOs need to build that trust that enables good collaborative relationship. The problem is that building trust is very time consuming, and when you lose a key member of staff, you lose all the relationships that this person has built, meaning that this relationship need to be built from scratch, therefore affecting the reciprocity and trust between citizens and the police. So these were some of the key findings that we have, the key themes that emerged from our requirements capture research. And what we did with that, as I mentioned before, we took these key themes, we discussed these key themes with our CCI partners. We worked together in trying to find solutions to these issues. And at the end of the CCI design lab, we had several options, several ideas that emerged, and we reviewed all of them. We did a feasibility analysis with the the help of a senior research, the senior officer at GMP, and we chose one concept direction for the development of our tool. So the concept direction that we chose is about supporting neighbor policing handover. So we wanted to develop a tool to support police forces in better managing the impact of the transfer of PCSOs and MBOs out and in their areas, and to that would a toolkit that would support the handover of useful community knowledge and link and contacts, and that would reduce the negative impact of officers living on the relationship that have been built in the communities. So following, once we identified the concept direction for the tool, we started the prototyping process. And the first thing that we did was to identify a group of key users who we met. Basically, these key users were people we met during the requirements capture research, who were very engaged with local policing in the area, but also engaged with our research and our project. And we then develop one of the very first prototype of this tool. You can see a picture on the left hand side, and then we went to our key users and asked for feedback about this initial prototype. Then we went back working on the prototype, improving it, and then we ask again for feedback to our key user, and so on and so forth, until we were happy that our key users were satisfied with the final prototype, which led to the development of our tool, which is called Community Connect, and it is a handover protocol specifically designed for neighbor policing roles, so for PCSOs and MBOs. And it aims to facilitate the handover by communicating strategic insight about a neighborhood, including key community representatives or citizens, important community facilities that facilitate engagement, and policing priorities for the neighborhood. It is also a tool that strongly encourages the participation of people in the communities in the handover process. And as Caroline mentioned before, we are in the process of implementing this tool. So we have developed it. We've run a trial, and now we are for the next 6 months we will be working on the implementation within our police force. And that is the end of my presentation.
Yeah, thank you very much for this very interesting presentation. I would like to remind our participants that if they want, they can ask questions in the chat. I don't see any at the moment. We have about 10 minutes for discussion. So in the meanwhile, I would like to make a start. And that is that when you're, from your experience from working with Greater Manchester Police, can you tell us a little bit about the typical backgrounds PCSOs and MBOs have, or what are they, have they studied or worked, or is it a career that somebody starts at a very early stage? Because you also mentioned there's a very complex skill that is required, and sometimes there is this this connection even to social work. So is there a typical background for somebody who takes that role, or is it like a very varied kind of background from your experience?
This is actually a really good question, because I think there is recruitment is really crucial for community policing and for delivering effective community policing, because you need to place in the role of PCSOs and MBOs people that have certain skill set and certain attitude. They need to like to work with people. They have to be open-minded. They have to be maybe willing to learn a bit of language of the people of if in the local area there are communities that are not British communities. The problem is currently recruitment does not look for that specific skill set. So it's quite the background of PCSOs and MBOs is quite varied, and I should make a distinction between PCSOs role and MBOs. So PCSOs, they are hired for the purpose of working as PCSOs, and as I say, there's no really, the recruitment is quite does not look for that specific skill set. So they come from all sorts of background, and some are very good PCSO with the right attitude, the right mind. Some others not quite. In terms of MBOs are police officers, and they join a neighbor policing team as NBOs, so they become police community officer by choice, and they can, during they usually are response officer, and they move to neighbor policing towards the end of their career, because in some cases there are officers who think the neighbor policing will give them the opportunity to do some meaningful police work, so they do it because they are motivated. Some others move to community policing because they want to be more they want a more relaxed work environment. They don't want to go out and responding to incidents every 5 minutes in all sorts of locations in Greater Manchester. But these people who move for that reason usually not the best officers that you can have, because they don't have that specific skill set again that you need in order to be a good MBOs. So yeah, recruitment is fundamental, but I don't think at the moment we're quite there. In terms of how we select our PCSOs and MBOs. Should be more targeted to specific kind of people with specific kind of skill set, I think.
Okay, very interesting. And maybe just a short follow-up from your work, and especially from the phase where you captured the requirements for the toolkit that was actually developed. How can we, in practice, imagine that this interaction between the community and the police takes place? Is it just people are working for the police? Are they just walking around and then engaging, in a spontaneous chatter, or are they receiving messages through WhatsApp, or is there like a very long in advance planned community gathering and then everybody comes together and they talk to each other, or how does that work in practice?
So in practice, when I was shadowing PCSOs and MBOs, I noticed that each PCSOs and MBO, they play it by ear. So they have their own way of delivering the community engagement, and they have their own resources for doing that. Some are very good with social media, especially the younger one. So they use that social media as a tool for identifying people and communities and opportunities for engaging. Some others, they have they start with maybe making friends with a business owner who has contacts with the other people within the community of other business owners within the local area, and then they make friends with someone else who has very good contacts with the community of elderly, vulnerable people, and so they use these contacts to try and create a sort of network and be included within the community. And other people, they just walk around the area and they talk to citizens who pass by and go to the shop. And so it is really up to the PCSOs and MBOs and what is their own unique set of skills and resources that they have, because at the moment nobody at GMP tells them how to do it. As I mentioned in the presentation, there's no training, there's no best practices, there's very little. They are left on their own in terms of how they engage, if that makes sense. So and that's why community policing can be so different from one place to another
And
in
then
Greater Manchester.
Yeah, great. And then we have a follow-up question from the chat, which I think perfectly links into the discussion, because then the question obviously arises. So when is this deemed to be successful or effective or desirable? And the question is, from your research with Greater Manchester Police, also especially when it comes to the senior managers, in your experience, did they realize that there was something new that came from developing the toolkit or from the research in general? Did it somehow change their own perception of what they originally thought about community policing and what they think maybe now after the development of the toolkit? I mean, it's still an ongoing process and there's still implementation phase coming up, but do you see a change in perceptions from the beginning to where you are now in this endeavor?
Okay, so this problem that we are trying to address, so the lack of continuity of neighbor policing roles, was not whatsoever in the radar of a GMP leadership. It wasn't in the agenda. It wasn't a priority. When we joined the project, especially as an organization, we had some priorities in terms of community policing, what we wanted to achieve and what we needed. But the requirements capture research revealed that there were other actually more pressing problems that were not detected, but they were really affecting everything. Because if you think about it, based on what I've told you, like what officers need in order to do their job, if they don't hand over all these resources, this knowledge and connection that they have, everything is erased and they have to start all over and over again. And it is a very simple, it's a very basic problem that every organization has. Handover should be addressed in every organization, but especially in neighbor policing. But it's something that has never actually, as an issue that has never been addressed. And in fact, I think that one of really the benefits of adopting this sort of approach, the human-centered approach, is that it gave us the opportunity to look beyond what were the priorities that we had already set in our mind, and look on the ground, where in the districts where neighbor policing is actually delivered. What are the very simple, basic things that we need in order to make community policing effective? Because if you don't have that, if you don't have a good handover, then everything else is jeopardized. And at the time, we didn't really know that. But with this project, and especially with this process, we were able to identify this and try to address this issue.
Okay, and that I think leads us to what's probably the last question, and unless another one is coming up, which is, so we're talking a lot in this session about human-centered design, and that the process is more important than the outcome, and that we have to see where the process based on this principle takes us. But how was it in your particular research area and in this project with Greater Manchester Police for you, when you had to communicate or communicated this design principled approach in practice? So is it difficult for a non-designer to undertake design work, so to speak? How did people approach that, or did you find that that came quite naturally from your conversations that you had?
No, I think the benefit of the design approach is that it's quite straightforward and it's quite easy. I mean, myself, I had no background in design whatsoever, because I'm a sociologist and I've always done very academic research. And for me to get to apply the design process with the help of other, in collaboration with other stakeholders, and I'm talking when I say stakeholders, I mean GMP partners, who could be social services, who could be business owner, who could be counselors, and police officers themselves, was really, really straightforward, because throughout the whole process, police officers and end users are at the center, and at any point and at every stage of the process they were involved. So it wasn't, I don't think it was anything difficult. And I could also, I can tell that when I was, there were some officers and partners that were key GMP partners that were very engaged with the process, because they saw the opportunity for the first time to be involved in something big, like an international project with other police forces, just by going out with a researcher and telling and showing the researcher, okay, this is what I do, these are the issues that I found. They didn't have to do anything different from what they usually do, because the research took place in their operating environment, and we did not change anything. It's just we work with them. We didn't ask them to do anything different or from what they usually do.
Yeah, so it was just more like sharing their practice, and it felt
Yeah,
quite
it was more, they had a voice and they were enabled throughout the process, and in terms of telling their story and what their needs were, what their experiences were. It's something that usually never happens, because usually in police forces what happens is that the leadership knows the priorities, they know the agenda, they decide what they decide what is needed, and then they just adopt whatever solution they are adopting, using a very top-down approach. And police officers in the district, they just they just have to get on with whatever is that they're told to do. So
wonderful. Well, thank you again for sharing your all your insights and your expertise in this area, and it was a very nice presentation, and also thank you for answering all the questions. And with that, it's time now to move on to our second presentation of the toolkits that we have in this session. So the next presentation has the title Predictive Policing, Uncovering and Reframing the Problem Focus. It will be delivered by Maximilian Querbach, who now works at the Landeskriminalamt Nordrhein-Westfalen, but participated in this project in a slightly different role at the for the Landeskriminalamt Niedersachsen. And he's known for many things, amongst them being the founder of and inventor and spiritor of the Magic Bus. I think this presentation will not include that particular kind of achievement. Maybe it will. We will see. Maximilian, the floor is yours, and we are looking very much forward to this presentation.
Thanks, Oscar. Thanks for the kind words. Yeah, I don't think that I have to introduce myself twice. I hope you can see the presentation and not my presenter's view. So I'm going to start. Well, I'm going to talk about predictive policing and the approach and the results we got in the CCI project in Lower Saxony. First of all, a little overview about the structure. I'm going to talk about what is predictive policing briefly, the approaches adapted in Germany and specifically in Lower Saxony, of course. Then about the requirements capture research, which Roberta already talked about. Then, of course, about reframing the problem focus, and a little short sneak preview of the solution. So, what is predictive policing exactly? Predictive policing is about collecting and analyzing data of previous crimes in order to predict and identify individuals or geospatial areas with an increased probability of criminal activity in the future. And this can be separated mainly into two targeting areas, one of which the most common is targeting places of property crime as a spatiotemporal prediction, which is, as I said, the most common practice. And it focuses on four main high impact and high volume crimes. And those were selected because they tend to be more reported by citizens. So there is a sufficient database for predictions, and they also are said to have a high impact on citizens' feelings of security, even though they are not the most severe crimes. On the other hand, predictive policing can also be used for targeting individuals like potential offenders or potential victim of crimes or violent crimes. And this approach was recently used in the US, in different states there, but partially abandoned due to severe civil rights protests, because the approach was accused of being racially biased and leading to an over-policing of Black communities, for instance, and by that also reproducing social inequalities and institutional racism. In Germany, predictive policing has been adapted so far by 6 law enforcement agencies, mainly focusing on predicting domestic burglary crimes. Some of which were in Germany, in Bavaria, in North Rhine-Westphalia, also in Hesse and Lower Saxony, with either in-house developments or in collaboration with external firms, companies, and external developed systems. So why did back then Lower Saxony choose a predictive policing approach in the first place? The reason was because there were rising crime rates of domestic burglary, and also by that low clearance rates of these crimes, and this had specifically negative impacts on citizens' feelings of security, and also got a lot of media attention, which created a lot of public pressure on political leaders to solve the problem. And predictive policing, back then already in use in the US, was perceived as an innovative approach which could enhance traditional policing techniques and support police in analyzing relevant crime data and deploy forces to areas at risk, and then deter or catch offenders on site. The system developed in Lower Saxony is called PREMAP, which stands for Predictive Mobile Analytics for Police, and has been introduced in 2016 as a politically desired concept, as I said before. And its development started as an in-house solution because the police in Lower Saxony decided to develop this on their own, a system on their own, because they didn't want an external company to work with internal police data and develop a black box system where you don't know how the algorithm works and how decisions are made by the system. So they developed their own tool because they also had the internal capacities to do so. PREMAP, as the name says, is a mobile application also, and is by that accessible on tablets, within the police cars on patrol, and also on internal police web browsers on their PCs. And in order to feed the algorithm, about 70,000 domestic burglary cases in Lower Saxony from 2013 to 17 were implemented in a prediction learning process and were updated each year. So from 2018, then 2019, and now to 2020. PREMAP's algorithm is based on the near repeat approach, and the prediction only uses crime-based factors like modus operandi, stolen goods, or the type of intrusion, so there are no person-based data at all. PREMAP then generates risk areas in which a burglary is likely to happen within the next 48 hours, based on those given information, and the idea behind is that there will be then focus patrolling in order to prevent crime from happening in the first place. Currently, the system is still in an ongoing development process in which Lower Saxony is testing different prediction models with more data, for instance, implementing socio-demographic data to enhance the quality of the predictions. Concerning the CCI project and what we did there, as Roberta already really well explained, was the requirements capture research. We also did in Lower Saxony interviews with police officers in different ranks about their usage of PREMAP, patrol officers. We also did, as I said, interviews, and I went on patrol with officers and asked them about how they implement PREMAP during their day, how they use it. And the aims of this approach was to evaluate the use of predictive policing, the system PREMAP, with an open research approach and identify specific needs and reflect perspectives from the police end users of the system, the patrol officers mainly. And the key of this approach is to take a step back from your personal assumptions for what you think should be improved and what really needs to be improved. And by that, get to the core of a process and build a foundation to design a more human-centered solution. When we started the project, I remember that me and a colleague already thought about, before the requirements capture research, what we could improve within the product pre-map and what it would need. And well, after the requirements capture research, well, we knew it was something completely different. So then these findings generated during this research were used to design a human-centered solution addressing the needs of the end users and improve the system as a whole. Before I come to the findings, I will shortly talk about the benefits of this whole design thinking approach. It first of all identifies the problems within a process and the real needs of recipients and end users of a product or a process in an open way for finding a bespoke solution. You learn from best and also from worst practices. So what not to do and what is best to do. It comes with as a transdisciplinary approach to identify and solve problems with creating flexibility in thinking. And you try at least to break through old patterns and be open to alternative solutions. When it comes to the findings of the requirements capture research and the usage of the predictive policing tool, several problems and constraints concerning pre-map and its implementation occurred, but also with general provision of crime data, the analysis or internal communication of relevant information were identified. First of all, the completely technical tablets who were supplied for officers were not really reliable functioning and not well designed for patrolling practice within their car. They didn't really need it. They didn't really use it during patrol. What officers also said is that there was a lack of feedback from the system and the whole approach in preventing crime, of course. When you think about becoming a police officer, you become, they said you become one to hunt the bad guys and not to drive around and, get no feedback of patrolling and potentially deterring offenders, which you can't measure. That was a main problem. Also, officers doubted the effectiveness of the whole approach, specifically in city areas, because they said they didn't think that just a police patrol in a really dense area in the city with lots of cars and people can really be deter a possible offender. The daily analysis, which should be provided as a part of the general information flow for patrol officers, which is provided by police analysts, was either not suited and detailed for patrol and not even provided. And the pre-map risk areas should have been one part of this analysis. And the other part was that during the briefings before the shifts, we have those shift managers who brief patrol officers of what has happened last shifts and what are the topics and whatsoever, but the briefing structure and the content differed from police department to police department and from shift manager to shift manager. That's what also Roberta said in her presentation, that it's based on individual preferences when there's a lack of standardization. So the question is, how would you get officers to use a predictive policing program when there is no general agenda and structure in which the provision of predicted crime data is one part of the whole process? What was revealed during the observations and interviews with police officers was that there were general issues, as I said, concerning standardizing internal analysis, the communication, dissemination, and also preparation and usage of predictive police data for daily police work and daily policing practice. It was not suited for them. And important information from earlier shifts was not always communicated to the next shift, and it really depended on individual preferences of people in charge, like shift managers or analysts. So I'm repeating myself, but there was no general standardized process in how to organize briefings or the information processing and distribution whatsoever. Concerning how officers use PreMap, they said that they occasionally used it if they were interested in the topic, but most of them did not use it after its implementation for the daily patrolling practice due to different problems. Like I said, the usability of the tablets, they didn't have the time to use it, or that no one was really providing any information about risk areas whatsoever, even though multiple risk areas appeared in different precincts. So they didn't have PreMap on their personal radar. What also came out in the observations is that officers then patrolled mainly based on their personal knowledge, and they have all their different knowledge about their district, people living in it, hotspots, offenders, and as said, they patrol on the experiences and the information they are provided with during shifts, shift briefings, or the analysis. But this information and knowledge is not managed and provided in a general process in which everyone from different shifts could benefit from this and its provision, and by that make patrolling more effective and efficient. Which leads me to next part, reframing the problem focus. So what did we thought at the beginning, what we needed to change in the process, and what were really the needs and what needed to be changed. So we switched the focus from improving a predictive policing system on a technical level to improving general conditions and information sharing and addressing internal barriers with police structure. We took officers' needs, so the end users' needs, concerning information provision and data analysis into account into the development of our toolkit. And by that, we developed a holistic long-term solution which addresses all those identified problems and real needs. And the question is, when developing systems or whatsoever, what can we change possibly for the better and what not? Means, would it have been better to improve or further develop predictive policing and hope with a better algorithm people will then use it? Or do we need to improve general conditions which have to be present in order to successfully implement a new product? The solution is named Patrol. The toolkit is Patrol, which is an acronym in German. I try to translate it freely. It's Police Analysis Toolkit for Research and Organizing Patrol Information, which comes with different parts, one of which is, of course, a general overview of the process and how the different gears interact with each other, and an analysis manual for police analysts, which gives them a standardized guide on how to analyze and prepare police data, especially for patrol service and for patrol officers to use it for their daily work. On the other hand, we developed a briefing manual for the shift managers, for every police officer in the position of a shift manager in Lower Saxony, as a standardized and a structured guide on how to conduct an effective briefing using the provided crime analysis, how to implement the data, and how to exchange data. And when it comes to exchanging data, we made use of an already existing but not really structured in use platform, which is NEMIS. It's a police messenger like WhatsApp. And within those messengers, police officers of every precinct can create channels in which they can share and exchange relevant information between the shifts, and shift managers could also brief and update officers remotely, because it's not always you cannot always do the briefings face to face, because people get calls for service and then you have to get into the car and drive out, so you don't get the information of what has happened maybe the shift before. And this is the solution for that. Well, the potential to create changes of this tool is the development of the patrol toolkit and its demonstration, what we already did, build the foundation to implement best practices and also intelligence and enhanced approaches within the police. In connecting already existing digital and analog infrastructure into one process, it will help the police in general, and specifically in patrolling practice, to analyze, communicate, and organize their daily work more efficiently. Patrol will help to connect every officers in their individual knowledge to their colleagues, and will help officers, leaders, and shift managers to allocate forces more efficiently based to the analyzed and shared knowledge and information through the patrol. Last but not least, when it comes in general to the predictive policing approach, there are several constraints which we have to take into account. One of which is the data quality, as well as its consistent input into a predictive system, as said before, not always sufficient. Police data can be flawed, outdated, incomplete, or inaccurate. It can also be even racially biased. So predictions, especially for person-based predictions made on false or biased data, can have severe effects on civil society and communities which are already been over-policed, or if predictions are made on the basis of arrest data or whatsoever. One main aspect is that there's also a lack of proof and effectiveness in predictive policing, because recent studies could not really tell if crime reductions were connected to predictive policing techniques or not. And taking this into account, maybe we have to think about changing the terminology of predicting crime, or are we just talking about a support tool for crime assessment for police? As I said, do we need another terminology to step back from the term predictive policing, which comes with higher expectations and also promises more than it actually can? What is in general really absolutely important, and I hope this gets clear throughout the whole presentation of Roberta and Caroline and Andrew, when developing tools for police or even for anything else or processes, it's absolute important and essential for a product to analyze, or for the designers to analyze the needs of end users and take their perspectives into account, and also the circumstances and roles within an institution, in order to develop a tool which solves existing problems in practice and not creates more problems. Which leaves me to the end of my presentation. Thank you for your attention. Any questions?
Thank you very much for this very interesting presentation. It's always great to hear from your practical perspective what the problems from that side of the discussion are, because of course there is a lot of academic consideration of predictive policing and generally the use of algorithms and machine learning and artificial intelligence to predict things and then try to steer certain public institutions. And one of the questions that you raised related to the data, but I also think it's very important that you share all of those practical considerations. But just maybe starting with one thing that you mentioned towards the end, is that you said that there's this question when you use the data, whether there's already an existing bias in it. I don't know whether you can share that, but were there any sort of attempts when it comes to PREMEMP to look at the historic crime data in that regard, or was there any discussion about what to do with that, or how long does the data that is relevant go back? Maybe you're not using the crime data for the last 100 years, but maybe just for 3 years, for example. So is there anything that you could share in that regard?
Well, when it comes to bias data, which can affect negatively people, I think we don't have this kind of problem in general in Germany with our approaches, because there are mainly used like crime data which are gathered by police. So it's just a crime gets reported, people note what has happened, and then it gets implemented into the system. If these are good factors to predict anything is another question, but they are not biased. When it comes to biased data, I think the problem is more when it comes to person-based predictions, like they did in the US, and I think they have a much more bigger problem than of over-policing Black communities. And when you implement this data into this really subjective, racially biased data into an objective algorithm, then you can say, well, it's not subjective, it's objective, and the algorithm is right. So policing there is okay. It's not racially biased at all. I think we didn't have any problems here in Germany. I think when implementing socio-demographic data, it can also maybe negatively affect neighborhoods. When you publish data, if you publish data of risk areas to citizens, then it can maybe have negative effects on neighborhoods, but they are not currently doing such things like this.
Yeah, and from your experience, was there also like the general appreciation or finding that there was enough, like the data that there was granular enough, so that there were enough details, or would it have been was it like a complete data set that you could work with, or would it have been desirable to have more exact data? And did you also like use other data sources from other institutions, or how does that work in the context of Lower Saxony?
Good question. Yeah, we Lower Saxony trialed last year with more data. Well, I think that we bought data from an external company, socio-demographic data, and they also trialed it. And we also wrote an academic paper, only in German, about effects. And well, it didn't get any better concerning the predictions, a little bit, but you always have the problem with those false and false positives, and then what to do with it. And yeah.
Okay. And some of the questions that we have here, so I would like to raise them now. So the first one is, it seems also that the LEA, or the let's say the top management and even politicians in requiring this to happen, right, in requiring the adoption of predictive policing, they had like a very clear mindset of what it was supposed to achieve. And so the question then is, how did you approach the requirements capture research with an open mind when everything seemed to be like very clearly set? So how did that opportunity emerge to rethink that whole process?
Good question. As I said before, me and a colleague, when the project was just starting and we already knew what were the different work packages and what was the aim, to enhance predictive policing, we sat together and thought, well, what do we need? We need more data. We need more sophisticated algorithms. We need a better visualizing of data whatsoever. And then, we started to do the observations within patrolling practice and talking really to the people who actually use it or should use it. And then when you hear, well, I don't really know why I should use it, or I don't think it's effective because of this, because of that, it's not technically working on the tablets, you hear about like really basic problems, like communication problems in an institution, which is actually needed to fit in such a product, and then you see, okay, well, we actually have to build a foundation here and to sort really basic things out in order to implement such kind of productions in the future. And then, and even though you have the best predicting technology whatsoever, if it's not suited to the end user, no one will use it at all.
So these were the elements where you then saw what Andrew presented in the beginning, where the user had to go up the stairs, or the human had to go up the stairs to reach the lofty technology goal, whereas now it's more the other way around, right? So it's slowly time to get to an end of this session, but before doing so, there's just one thing that I saw now in the presentation, which I found quite interesting. So I wanted to get your view as a practitioner, as an expert on this. And that is that when looking at this map that you presented from this one article from Seidensticker, maybe it's a pure coincidence, or maybe the study had the kind of scope, but it seemed to me that like a lot of Western German Bundesländer, that they have attempts to implement predictive policing, and Berlin, right? But a lot of Eastern German Bundesländer do not seem to be active in that area. Is that a coincidence, or maybe just something I'm reading out there, which is
I think you're right, but I think Saxony, they wanted to, they are starting to implement a predictive policing approach. Well, I heard it a few months ago. I think when it comes to Western Germany states, it's because of those were the main states who had a big problem with rising crime rates of domestic burglary, because to the borders of the Netherlands. And to be honest, I don't really know and I don't think that Eastern German states have that kind of a big problem. You know, like most of the people are living in Western Germany, North Rhine-Westphalia, with the most people living in one state in Germany, and a high density of big cities. So the pressure to come up with something innovative and fast was much higher, I guess, than in Eastern Germany. Maybe they were smart and just waited the outcome of West Germany and thought, okay, let's see what they do, and then maybe we implement or not.
Yeah, I see. Okay, so, and then the last question from my side, I also take it again from the chat. So do you think, of course, again, probably we need to emphasize at the start that the implementation of the toolkit and everything that is still ongoing, right, until the end of the year. And that was already mentioned during the presentation of Caroline, that there will be a presentation of the toolkits in December. So do you think from your CCI research that it has impact or changed the framing of predictive policing in Lower Saxony at all? And if so, to what extent? Because before it was like more or less an end in itself, and the use of the technology. And now during your presentation, I think you already mentioned, right, maybe the predictive policing is too much of, it's the wrong term. Maybe we should use a different term, right? Well, could you propose a different term then for how we should look at this? Or what would the new term need to contain or to acknowledge?
Well, the new term would just be a simple risk assessment tool. I don't think, maybe the presentation sounded a little bit negative about the whole approach. I don't think that is generally negative when government institutions try to come up with new solutions that can bring them forward. But the thing is, you have to do it in the right way, not under pressure, and come up with fast solutions in order to show something to the public. We have to develop something. Okay, we're fine, we're good, we did something. The thing is, I think it's good to produce such things, but sometimes those things are so connected with politics, and it's problematic, you know. And after 2 years, nobody asks again, because 2 years before you said, yeah, we did something, we created predictive policing, we implemented it. Okay, we're fine. Nobody asks further. What happened? What is the outcome? Crime rates are falling. if it's to predictive policing or not, we did something. And I think, yeah, when it comes to implementing new technology or approaches, you always need like those kinds of requirements, capture what is actually needed. And I think this should be done always. You know, you have to see what end users need, what people in the institution really need, and not what, well, the public wants. But I think it's quite difficult. So coming back to the term, I would say it's only more risk assessment for police, but yeah.
Yeah, and maybe also the information sharing element that you
Yes.
that you mentioned and pointed out, it may be better now. Yes. Okay. Wonderful. I think we are. Yeah, we just hit 4 o'clock. So the session is over. But I just would like again to thank you for the presentation, and also of course Roberta again for her presentation. And I think I would like to invite again Caroline and Andrew to maybe just have a couple of concluding words, and then we finish the session.
Just to say thank you ever so much, Max, for coming back. Again, I know that you've been back several times to present about the work that you did at the LKA, and also to Roberta for her presentation as well. And thank you also, Oscar, for moderating for us today. Just to say that I know that we've focused very much on the process in this session, but there are going to be some sessions which are about the tools, and I know that at 1700 hours there is a presentation that is being given by the LKA which is on the Insight tool. So we very much look forward to learning more about the tools that have been developed, and we do hope that people will come to our final event, which will be in December. So thank you very much, everybody.